All right, we're recording. Okay, so welcome to our virtual tool demo on the soil sampling toolkit by our wonderful friends at Citizen Science Community Resources. And we're continuing our day of soil at Public Lab earlier this morning or today. We just had a call on community science and soil pollution, highlighting some of the ways that people can investigate soil pollution in their own neighborhoods. And right now we get to hear about one of those specific tools. We'll do some introductions. My name is Jeanette Lim, and I am the research coordinator at Public Lab. And I'm thrilled to be joined on this call by Jackie James and Mike Rosenberg of Citizen Science Community Resources, who will be showing us their soil sampling toolkit and the resources they've developed around it. Following that, we'll have a question and answer session, but I will hand it over to Jackie and Mike now. Please introduce yourselves and then take it away.
Mike, you want to go first?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'm Mike Rosenberg. I'm an intern at CSCR through a Master's of Public Health program at the University of Albany. I'm also a physician assistant, so I have a little bit more of a medical background. I've been here for a few months now, and we've been really developing this Enviro Bucket soil sampling toolkit to kind of get out to the public so that there's a convenient and easy way for people to test for contamination in their soil.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Jackie James, and again, I am with Citizen Science Community Resources. We're a small nonprofit in Tonawanda, New York, which is outside of Buffalo. And I'm really excited to be here to show you our Enviro Bucket and how we've used it here in our own community and how we've used it and how we're helping some other communities as well. Welcome.
So Mike, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. All right, so I have a little PowerPoint presentation here. Let me just let me know if you guys are seeing it.
Yeah. Yes, we can see it.
You got it.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about our Enviro Bucket, which is designed to take soil samples for testing of potentially hazardous contaminants. And then you've already been introduced to me and Jackie. So Jackie's going to talk a little bit about CSCR and how we developed the bucket.
So this is a photograph of us taking our soil samples outside a polluter. You see these stacks of a company in our community called Tonawanda Coke Corporation. And we're obviously at a playground. This photo was taken several years ago. I believe it was fall of 2012. And this company, there's actually a very long story about our campaign of organizing around community-based citizen science. We actually used air sampling with the air bucket first. And we did find concerning levels of benzene in the air bucket. However, we were also concerned about the black soot particulate matter coming from this company. They produce something called foundry coke, and it's a byproduct of coal. And they use foundry coke to make, as an energy source to make steel. So this was an environmental justice neighborhood about a half a mile south of the company. And as you see right there, we tested the soil. We sampled the soil, and we sent the samples to a local laboratory to be tested. And this was the very, very, very beginning of our Enviro Bucket, but we had no idea we were gonna end up with an Enviro Bucket at the time. All our tools were just in a tote. And however, we did do a lot of research, and we reached out to the New York State Department of Health and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and asked them how we should properly sample and test our soil at the time. We also were working with a community, another similar community outside in North Birmingham, Alabama. This community has 2 foundry coke plants, and they had tested their soil and found dangerous levels of certain pollutants in their soil. And that's what made us start to think, well, I wonder if these same pollutants are in our soil. They were in their soil. I wonder if they're in our soil. That coupled with the fact that the neighbors in this community reached out to me and said, look at the tomato plants in my garden. There is something that is flying through the air and landing on our plants and burning holes in the tomato plants. It also, this gooey black substance, which we now believe was black tar coming from this company, was also landing on their vehicles and burning holes in the paint on their vehicles. So that's, you know, coupled with talking to the folks in North Birmingham and then the community stories, we felt like, well, we want to find out what this substance is. It's obviously dangerous. It's burning up these tomato plants. What is it? And let's see if it's the same pollutants as what they found in North Birmingham. So that's how all of this started. And that was the start of the Enviro Bucket. And we're still doing soil sampling and testing. We're making our ways. We haven't given up. And actually, we're going to be going back to this same community and retesting. So that's where we are right now. And that's again, we're still concerned about the contaminants. This company did shut down in 2018 after our campaign and working with the Department of Justice. Again, that's another whole story, but we're here to share with you our soil story. And there's more to our soil study on our website. If you'd like to refer to that afterwards, we'll have information of how to access that. Thanks. Mike?
All right, so when we're talking about soil testing in general and just, you know, what is the need for it? Why did we want to develop the bucket? It's good to understand like the background about what can be in your soil, what's the health risks, what are the benefits of testing your soil. So for the reasons why you test your soil is mainly because you don't know what's in it. You know, there's a lot of different land uses that properties can have historically that, you know, if you buy a home somewhere in a neighborhood, you know what you've done to that property and you know what you've put into that soil, but you don't know what was there already. And contaminants in soils can come from a lot of different sources and sources that might not be immediately apparent to you. There can also be chemicals that are just exist in background levels in soils that can sometimes concentrate to be harmful. Like New York State, for example, has a lot of arsenic in its soil, just existing already. And then human activities like industry, agriculture, automobile traffic's a big one. Just past land uses really affect what is in the soil. Spills, runoff, aerial deposition of chemicals from industrial sources like we talked about with Tonawanda Coke, that can bring stuff into these residential areas where it can be potentially harmful to people. And then also a lot of residential building materials historically had additives that were now known to be harmful to human health, like lead, asbestos had been a big one, obviously. And then sometimes, you might think that you have fresh topsoil or you brought in compost, your soil's healthy for growing, but the problem with some of those soil additives that you might purchase is that they're often unregulated and they might not be tested for contaminants themselves. So you might be bringing contamination from those sources. And just in general, people just seem to not be aware of the potential for their soil to be contaminated. There's been a lot of studies that have surveyed people and like urban gardeners about, have they thought about testing soil, or like, why haven't they tested their soil? And a lot of the results you see in those studies are just that they don't think about it. It's not like air and water pollution where, you can see it directly. You can see smoke coming out of smokestacks from factories, or you can see, like garbage in the water, or you can smell that the water doesn't smell right, the air doesn't smell right. Soil is kind of like out of sight, out of mind. So it's very easy for people to kind of not think about it. But air or water pollution, a lot of that stuff ends up in the soil and it's still posing a health risk to people. So when you want to test your soil, testing can help answer some of these questions and address the concerns about contamination. And more importantly, it can help people decide if they need to change the way they use their land, they use their soil. So there's safeguarding practices you can employ if you do find contamination that can help mitigate your exposure to some of these contaminants so they don't actually harm you. and just things you can do to try to remove contamination from your soil or just improve the health of the soil. And then if you test your soil and you find that nothing harmful is there, well, then you have the peace of mind that your soil is safe. So that's also important. And then it helps bring people together at a community level. It helps citizens kind of fight for public health and environmental justice. You need to have data when you go to your communities, when you go to your local legislative bodies, if you're trying to remediate sites, or if you're trying to remove sources of pollution from the community. That all starts with information from testing. So you need to have that kind of community science process that is what CSCR is all about, where it kind of empowers people to make these changes by giving them the information they need through this kind of testing. So what can be in the soils that's harmful? Heavy metals are a big one. This is lead, arsenic, cadmium. There's a few different heavy metals that are naturally occurring elements. They're high atomic weight and density. These have had a lot of historical, industrial, agricultural uses. Urban soils especially tend to have a lot of heavy metals because they're just more affected by human activity. Importantly, any house constructed prior to 1978 should be assumed to have lead paint, because lead wasn't banned for use in paints until 1978. And then lead was an additive of gasoline until the EPA outlawed it in 1996. So properties next to busy roadways, you can often have elevated levels. And the important thing about this is that heavy metals are persistent in the soil. So, all this stuff happened years ago. Let's say 1978, maybe your house is newer, or, maybe you're not really next to a highway where you're too concerned about the deposition of lead. But if there had been a house on a property before, if they had lead paint in their soil, if there was a fence that had been painted with lead-based paint, all this stuff can end up in the soil and it stays there. It doesn't get broken down or washed away. Once heavy metals are in soil, they tend to just remain. Another big source for heavy metal exposure is pressure treated lumber that had arsenic prior to 2003. So decks, playgrounds, stuff where, kids are out, in that soil, getting that soil on themselves, that can still contain arsenic from when it was constructed. PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, they're another contaminant that can be in the soil that can be potentially harmful. They're semi-volatile organic compounds. These are from the incomplete combustion of organic materials. So you're thinking coal, oil, gas, wood, tobacco. They can form small particles in the air or bind to particles, and that's where they can travel many miles. So think industrial smoke plumes, like Jackie was talking about, Tonawanda residents locally, they were seeing all this soot kind of falling on their plants, burning holes in paint. Can be nasty stuff. And then it settles into the soil, and they're semi-volatile, so they do tend to degrade in the environment, but they can still persist in the soil months to decades. And then pesticides, obviously, there's been a lot of harmful things that have been in pesticides that have led to many of them being banned, but that stuff can still be in your soil. And even if you're not using pesticides yourself, there can be pesticides carried by wind or runoff from local farms or gardens that, it ends up on your property, even though you weren't the one using it. So these are just a little bit of the sources of soil contaminants, just to see that what's in what different source, what can be released, lead from automobile traffic, PAHs from industrial sites. So we know what's in the soil. What is the health risk that it poses? Well, it's all about exposure. So that usually occurs with soil through skin contact or breathing in dusts. You can accidentally eat small amounts of soil. Children are very bad for this because they're always putting their hands in their mouths. So if they're outside playing in the soil, that can be ingested. And then eating fruits and vegetables with contaminants that are either on or in them, either externally on like root vegetables that you didn't peel, or if some plants uptake heavy metals and other contaminants, and you eat them, and that ends up in your body. So children are just generally more vulnerable because they just ingest more soil physiologically. They just uptake more of it than adults do. And it's a problem because young children are still developing, they're more vulnerable to contaminants. Elevated levels of lead are pretty common in urban soils. They pose health risks, especially to young children. And then also pets who go outdoors can be just at risk as humans, and they can bring soil back in with them that you can then be exposed to. So heavy metals, they can do a lot of nasty things in the body. They can cause multiple organ damage. Lead accumulates in the bone and it can stay there for many years. Things like anemia, kidney disease, bone diseases. Long-term exposure is bad. It can be leading to progressive muscular or neurological degenerative processes. So things that kind of resemble Parkinson's, MS, Alzheimer's. And then most are classified as known or probable human carcinogens. They can also be a problem for pregnant women. They can increase the risk of miscarriage, fetal demise, or birth defects. And really importantly, that a lot of people are concerned about that we've noticed is that lead can harm a young child's growth, behavior, and cognitive development. So there's a lot of Department of Health guidelines, locally, state level, that you'll always see regarding lead screening in children and what is an acceptable level. PAHs, they can be carcinogenic as well as teratogenic, meaning they can cause birth defects. They have occupational studies that show an associated risk of cancer. BAP is a particularly nasty one. They can be potentially damaging to the skin, blood, and immune system. And depending on how your exposure occurs, you can get an acute illness or you can develop chronic disease. They're lipid soluble, meaning that they're easily absorbed and they can go to a lot of different tissues in your body. And the only problem with these is that there's really no good information available from studies on humans to tell what effects can result from being exposed to them at certain levels. So it's just best to minimize your environmental exposure to these as much as possible. So we're going to now show you the Enviro Bucket, how it works, just so you can kind of see it and understand like how we're going to be using it for testing. The nice thing about the bucket is that all the supplies fit in an easy to carry and durable bucket. So it's very self-contained. And these are the contents that it comes with. So basically, it has everything you need to take soil samples to EPA guidelines. The only thing it doesn't include is distilled water, but that can be purchased at any grocery store. And so Jackie's going to come over and kind of show you what's in the bucket and how we use some of the contents.
So I'm going to go into the other room. We're in 2 separate rooms right now, so give us a couple seconds while I walk over there. But again, this is today's version of the Enviro Bucket. You see it here on the screen. Again, we started soil testing back in 2012, so that was a number of years ago. There's been a few iterations of this. We're really excited because we've used the whole idea of the 5-gallon deep Home Depot bucket, just like we did with the air bucket, which is actually in the store at Public Lab. And we can reuse this bucket again and again for cleaning. Thanks, Evan. Evan is on this call, so actually this was his idea. We didn't think, again, all these contents were in a huge tote. It took some time, but we sourced everything in high quality products like the stainless steel trowel. We spent a lot of time on finding the right equipment and then to all fit it neatly into this 5-gallon bucket. So it's really very handy to just bring around to different sites with you. Again, we're to continue our soil story. Our soil story is continuing, but we have gathered over the last 8 or 9 years, gathered so much information on gathering data with this method. We want to share it with you. And as an output, we ended up putting this kit together. So this kit, you can build it yourself if you'd like, or what we're finding is that folks sort of like the convenience of just having everything together and not having to run to 3 or 4 different stores to find all of these contents. So our instruction manual is on the website as well. So hold on a second.
And then I'm just gonna, should I stop? I think I'm gonna stop the share here just so I can give you the video of Jackie here. Let's see. Not sure how to do that. Do you know how I stop the share to just have it show you?
You should be able to stop share screen.
Yeah.
Go to share screen.
Oh, stop share. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to be.
Actually something closer. Okay, just put it on here.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, here it is. The Enviro Bucket. There we go. Okay. So we'd normally show you this outside, but it is like 35 degrees right now here in Buffalo. So we've opted to just show you here and how it works.
There is a video on our website as well on how to use it. We actually are in a garden and we go through all the steps of how to use this in a garden. But right now I'll just show you what's in it and how it's used. So here it is, and inside, again, everything is neatly packed inside the bucket. We have a cooler. We have a stainless steel bowl, a first aid kit, a 100-foot tape measure. We even put in garbage bags, disposable gloves, disposable towels. These are for cleaning up. A stainless steel trowel, and we like the stainless steel trowel because it has markings on it, and these markings are very convenient for when you're sampling the soil. You want to take 0 to 2 inches, and you can use these markings on the stainless steel trowel. Some marker flags, a brush, and this is for cleaning up. And inside the cooler, we have 3 of these amber jars. These amber jars are sterilized. It's very important is with some pollutants, if you're testing for certain pollutants, to put it in a sterilized amber jar. We have a bag of Alkanox. This is for cleaning up. A stainless steel spoon, and a double bag. This double bag is used for ice. So after you sample your soil and put it in the jar, again, it depends on the pollutants that you're testing for. You have to put it on ice. So the procedure is, we also have a binder or a folder, and inside the folder is all the proper paperwork that you would need to properly collect a soil sample. We've also included a quick guide. Again, you can refer to the manual that's online, but this is what we found is that this is more convenient for people to follow a quick guide. So the steps that are included are, first, you would fill out the paperwork. And again, we go step by step in our instruction manual how to properly fill out the paperwork. There's a chain of custody, a site form, and some jar labels included. So you would fill out all this paperwork first. The next step would be to figure out how you want to sample your soil. And can you see this? There are different steps. Again, this diagram is in our manual. This is a 5-point method, and then there's the 3-point method. 5-point is used for large gardens, lawns. 3-point method is used for smaller areas like playgrounds. The next step, after you figure out your method, you use these to put in the points, and then you sample your soil. Again, using the trowel, go down to 0 to 2 inches, take either 3 or 5 samples, put it in the stainless steel bowl, mix it up, take out any rocks or any worms, take the soil and put it in your jar. Then take the label and put it on the jar, and take your jar, put it in the cooler on the ice, seal it up, and send it to the laboratory. We also have a video on our website of how to send your samples to the laboratory. So we've partnered with Eurofins Test America and another laboratory for EPA approved testing. So that is all on our website, and Mike is going to go more into that. So that's all.
So let me just share my screen again here. Okay, so now you have a little bit of a better understanding of how the bucket looks and what it does. So let's talk about, oh, here is actually, this is the video that we're talking about. That's a demonstration that we did outdoors for how to use the bucket. So we'll have this link that in this recorded PowerPoint, or you can just go to our website and the video is on there. And then we want to talk about, so why use this Enviro Bucket? How is it different from other testing products that might be available? So one of the important things is that when you go to like a big box store like a Home Depot, I don't know if I should have actually said the store name, or any gardening center, you'll see soil testing kits. And this is kind of what people think of when they think of soil testing. But most of these that you're seeing are for soil metrics that are important for plants, not humans. So it's testing for things like pH and nutrient levels, not hazardous contaminants. So the Enviro Bucket is specifically testing for hazardous soil contaminants such as heavy metals and PAHs. There are inexpensive soil lead testing kits, but these tend to be just simple colorimetric analyses that really only tell you if lead is detectable above a certain threshold and will not sometimes return a specific quantitative value. So the Enviro Bucket testing through Eurofins Test America, that gives you detailed and highly accurate laboratory data. And that's important, you know, if you're going to be getting involved in any kind of, you know, public health initiatives, mobilizing community members to you know, tackle pollutant sources, any legal issues, you know, you need to have a laboratory that's testing things to EPA guidelines. So test kits that do involve accurate laboratory analysis tend to be very expensive, can be many hundreds of dollars. But then the thing you'll find with them is that they don't typically provide many of the actual physical tools that you need to take soil samples according to EPA guidelines. So the nice thing about the bucket is that it's giving you all the tools that you need to actually take proper soil samples. And then existing test kits rarely provide meaningful guidance toward interpreting like complex lab reports. And these can be if you don't have a background in any kind of environmental science or, you know, any kind of scientific background, it can be really difficult to understand what these lab reports are telling you. Lots of numbers, lots of abbreviations that you may not really know what they mean. It's difficult to understand when something's an elevated value. Is it actually hazardous to you? So, you know, CSCR, one of the main benefits of this is that we're going to give you some consultation regarding the significance of the results. We're going to help you interpret the data. So, you know, that's a big part of this because it's one thing to get that information back from the lab, but you also kind of need to know if it's actually significant or not and what you should do with it. So again, the main thing that this all kind of surmises is that the Enviro Bucket is filling a need for an affordable, accurate, convenient, and fully self-contained testing kit for use by the general public. So we're training people essentially to take proper soil samples using established EPA principles and protocols, which is important. And then the documentation for the Enviro Bucket is completely open source. So we're providing this as a resource to communities, to individuals, as a citizen science project, essentially, where you know, you don't have to purchase this from us, you can put it together yourself, and all the information is available on our website. You can, you know, go to, we have a list of inventory sources for parts of the kit. You can go get them yourself. So, you know, this is something that can be put together by people who kind of get interested in the topic of soil testing and soil health. And then it's designed to be reusable and shared. So that's a big part of this, is that a lot of these other testing kits, you know, it's just kind of a one-time thing. But this, the Enviro Bucket, you know, we want this to be shared. We want it to, like, maybe your neighbors are interested in testing their soil, or, you know, a high school science department maybe wants to do a project with their students, or, you know, have community groups that you're trying to, like, you know, focus on an issue in the community regarding pollution or soil contamination. So this is something that's meant to be shared. It's durable, it's reusable. And then for us, 100% of the profits that we make from sales of the bucket go to our environmental programs. So you're kind of getting the added benefit of helping to support a nonprofit that's doing a lot in our community for addressing issues of environmental pollution and environmental health. So how is the testing done once you get your sample? So like Jackie mentioned, we partner with Eurofins. So you take the sample, there's a site form that you fill out regarding where you got the sample. Then there's chain of custody forms that you use, which are filled out. And those are important because it gives you, you know, in terms of legal documentation, it proves that, like, nothing was tampered with. that, it was sent in a timely manner. So it's very important that, when you're testing something like this and you're trying to get really accurate and reliable data, that you have a chain of custody that shows who had the samples at what time. And then the copy of the test report that you get from the laboratory is then sent both to the person who's using the kit and to us. We interpret the test result and then we communicate the findings to the user. And then one of the things we're doing is that if users consent, we want to upload their soil testing data to FieldScope for public sharing. So FieldScope is an online interactive citizen science platform. It has mapping resources that helps enable research into environmental issues such as soil contamination. So basically, there's going to be this nationwide map where we'll have testing plots, and then you can click on that plot for where somebody had tested their data or tested their soil, and you'll see what was in the soil there. And that can be a really helpful resource for communities who might want to kind of compare the results, see if there's any trends in like high levels of certain contaminant, or just compare to like other similar communities. So this is actually a picture that I took from a post on Public Lab that was really good about laboratory results. I kind of like this, but just showing you that, there's a lot of numbers on these. There's a lot of IDs. There's a lot of different names for the contaminants. There's a lot of abbreviations. So it's not something that can be very easy to wrap your head around sometimes. So when we're interpreting results, it's important to know that there is no single standard that defines acceptable levels of contaminants in soils. So a commonly used reference are the US EPA soil screening levels. These are part of the regional screening levels that a lot of states will use to kind of determine if they need remediation at brownfield sites. The EPA SSLs, they were developed to help evaluate Superfund sites that were intended for residential land use in the future. But they're very useful even outside of the context of brownfield and Superfund sites because they can still provide guidance for interpreting test results for like normal residential properties tested by individuals because they are based on assessments of risk to human health posed by the various soil contaminants. So they're a good starting level. It's important to know that they are not cleanup standards. So they're basically thresholds that the EPA uses and states can use to determine if there needs to be more thorough investigation into the contamination. It doesn't mean that if you get above one of the SSL levels that the site needs to be remediated. It just means that there needs to be more investigation to see like what the sources of the contaminants are and how they might actually be impacting human health. So some states use the EPA SSLs to guide their soil remediation policies, but a lot of states have developed their own standards and those can differ in their applicability to residential uses and in estimations of health risks. So as part of that, navigating the soil screening guidelines from region to region can be very complex. We have developed a comprehensive reference of the soil screening guidelines in use by all 50 states. This is available on the resources section of our website, and it's also going to get posted to Public Lab. When we interpret the soil testing data, we're going to compare the results to both the EPA SSLs and then see whatever additional screening guidelines are in use by the state from where the samples were taken. And then we're going to notify the users of any results that were above the acceptable thresholds for either standard. Or we can tell people that, hey, all your values were within normal limits, so there's no risk of hazard to you. So site uses for the property, we also determine when when interpreting results. It can be important. There's often unrestricted versus restricted residential use. It's kind of important to keep in mind the context that the property is being used for. Some guidelines can be a little more strict if you're going to be raising livestock or growing a lot of produce. So for costs and information for ordering, it's $159 for the bucket itself. And then you can test for specific contaminants such as lead, heavy metals, pHs. Those require separate laboratory fees. It varies depending on what the panel you're ordering is. Cost includes the interpretation of the laboratory report, as we had mentioned. And then we're also going to give you some information materials regarding any found contaminants and about soil safety so that you can kind of mitigate the risk of your exposure. So the current cost, if you were to, it would be a little complicated. You have to go to a bunch of different places to get the lowest price, but technically you could put together everything for about $50. And then you can use the manual that's accessed on the CSCR website in order to take the samples. But then you would have to obtain the sample jars and, well, actually you would have the custody forms and the sample jars, but if you're not going to be using Eurofins, you may have to have different forms, different jars. It depends if you go and seek out your own laboratory you might have to work on that yourself. So you kind of lose the convenience of everything just being ready to go if you purchase it from CSCR. And then you can buy additional consultation services. So this is kind of next steps, mitigation strategies, talking about legal issues, community environmental advocacy guidance, just the more complicated things that we can help you with just based on our experience doing these things in our own community. And then if you wanted to order, you can just visit the store at csresources.org. All right, so thank you very much to Public Lab for hosting us. It's been really nice to share this with everybody. If you have any questions, like to have any additional information regarding the Enviro Bucket or soil testing, just contact us. We're also going to do a bit of a Q&A here if anyone has any questions now, but here is our contact information if you want to reach out to us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing regarding our soil study is that as an outcome of collecting those soil samples that we collected in 2012 and 2013, that company that I showed you in that picture called Tonawanda Coke, they eventually were, there was a huge federal trial against them in federal court, and they were ordered to fund, at their sentencing, they were found guilty of breaking environmental laws in New York State District Court. Actually, it's again, we have a whole other story regarding that, and it's quite a story. But as an outcome at the sentencing of this company, they were ordered to fund 2 studies. There were like 30 studies submitted to the judge presiding over the case. And we put together our data, our soil data, and put it together in a project proposal and submitted to the judge. And at sentencing, our $700,000 comprehensive soil study was funded as a result. And this all came about because we thought of testing our soil and collecting this data. So we have experience with community organizing and obviously how to use the data for action. And again, all of this information, most of it is on our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie and Mike. Yeah, really an incredible story of how this all came to be. So thank you to both of you so much for showing us this, community-centered tool, community-developed tool for soil testing, and how you've continued to help others answer questions they have about their soil. So as Mike mentioned, we do have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. If you have a question for Jackie and Mike, please go ahead. You can take yourself off mute and ask away. Feel free to also enter your question in the chat if that is a preferred way to share your questions.
Hi, I'm Bernard. I'm based in Ireland. That was great, thank you. So I got some tips on how to collect samples. I'm kind of at a stage where I'm kind of looking for someone who's useful to test it in Ireland. Do you guys do testing, or I'm just thinking off the top of my head and it's not really, sorry, I don't have a real question at the end of that. No, thanks, just thank you. I'm kind of thinking too much now. Sorry.
Well, it would be difficult. We actually did have another inquiry a couple of weeks ago. Somebody, I think it was in Ireland, that wanted to purchase a couple of our kits, but it didn't really make sense.
Not me. No,
Yeah,
no,
everything
that's.
is, oh, what happened?
No, that's the conclusion I was coming to while I was rambling
I'm
there.
still
So
on.
yeah, thank you.
I lost my screen for
Sorry,
some reason.
Sorry, you're still on. We just stopped
Yeah.
sharing the screen so that we can see you
Okay,
talking.
all right.
Yeah, I was coming to the conclusion
So
that I
it
have
makes
all the
sense.
bits and
Everything
bobs
is open
myself.
source. So if you wanted to build a kit yourself,
Yeah.
that probably would make the most sense, and reach out either to a local university or a laboratory.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? I can also ask a question that I
I
have. Oh, sorry, Diane has a question here, typed into the chat. Have you heard if planting sunflowers helps with removal of heavy metals from the soil?
Actually, I've been in contact with Cornell University, and they've done some research regarding using certain plants for mitigation or remediation. And unfortunately, yes, I have heard about using sunflowers, and I have talked to them about it, and there's not really any hard evidence really saying that any plants can help mitigate. And it really is so dependent on the pollutant and the plant. So there's no just general oversight. Sunflowers take up all pollutants. So her advice was, if there's a specific pollutant that you're interested in mitigating or getting rid of, then perhaps there is a plant that would uptake some of that. So, but it's really important to first find out what pollutant is in your soil.
And also just to add on to that, so talking about like, plants in the soil that could help get rid of some of the heavy metals and whatnot. There's also other things you can do to your soil that might help. But again, it's very dependent on the contaminant. Many heavy metals are uptake by plants much more readily in acidic environments. So you can essentially lime your soil and increase the pH to kind of limit what they're uptaking. If you want to prevent it from getting into if you're gardening and you don't want it to get into your plants. So there's things you can do to the soil to kind of affect how contaminants are moved around in the soil and how they can potentially become an exposure risk. But it is very dependent on each specific contaminant.
Right. So that's why it's important to first do your research, listen to the stories, use your intuition, and then based on all of that, figure out what you need to test for, because testing can be expensive. But what we found is the reason why we wanted to test our soil, it was really a surrogate for what was in the air that landed on our soil. And the soil testing was actually less expensive than air testing. And with air testing, it's more difficult. I mean, you have to figure out where and when an air is moving, right? Soil is like just in the air, then it lands on the soil. It's not going anywhere. So that's easier. Actually, soil testing is easier in many ways. Microremediation, I'm not familiar with that at all. Mike, have you read anything about that?
I haven't really come across that, but I could see how there might be something to that. I'm trying to think if I've read anything the last couple months about it, but mostly it's about phytoremediation that you come across.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that'll be something that I might put some research into, maybe put something on the CSCR website about.
I was just going to say, I'm Ashley, and I'm based in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, and microremediation is a really popular method, at least for people investigating it around mushrooms, just because we have a pretty wet environment here.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of tests that are being done there, and there's a couple groups, I think, in Alaska that are trying it out in like a confined space, like not doing it out, may say in the wild, but doing it on private properties to kind of see how it works in the Arctic setting. So there are people who are doing it. Paul Stamets is a researcher that's really famous for it, but I don't know of any open source like toolkits like this one, right? That's available. Thanks.
Yeah, and one thing I do know is that I think microremediation is one of the areas that needs like quite a bit more research, because sometimes having other plants nearby can sort of affect what the mushroom does. So it's not necessarily, or what the fungi does, I guess, in general. So it's like not always predictable exactly what's going to happen. So yeah, again, with any remediation method, like very site specific. Yeah.
Right. And again, what we found with, the folks that have our toolkit right now, that it really has given them peace of mind. There was a mother of 3 little girls in Virginia, and they were about to purchase a piece of property, and there was a vineyard right next door to them. And she was concerned about the pesticides that they were using on the vineyard, and the vineyard was a little bit higher up than their property. And so she was concerned about the runoff coming onto their property. And she had 3 little ones, and they love to play in the soil, right, around the pond. So we actually consulted with her, figured out what pollutants she should test for. She actually tested the area around the pond, okay, the soil around the pond and a couple other areas in the backyard. And they all came up, you know, fine. And she was just very, very happy. Thank you very much. She was one person that purchased a kit for herself, and then she gave it to her local high school, and we have developed a high school curriculum. Again, you know, as Mike suggested, pass it on. The bucket is meant to be used and then shared.
Getting back to some of the remediation topics too, like just, you know, discussing phytoremediation, microremediation. So like, it's a very, obviously it's complicated, and it's very variable depending on the site and the contaminant. So it can be very difficult to do like any true remediation with your soil. But if you're worried about soil contamination and maybe you're not at the step where you've actually tested your soil yet, but you just want to protect yourself, mitigation strategies are actually probably what's better. They're usually simple. So soil safety steps that you can take, like always wearing gloves when you garden, brushing off your shoes when you come indoors so that you're not tracking soil in with you, you know, covering loose soil or using raised garden beds where you're putting in clean topsoil that you're getting from a vendor who's actually tested it. So like, these are simple things you can do that will mitigate the risk. So even if there is contamination in the soil, you know, it can be there and you can still be safe. And there's a lot of strategies that we've developed and a lot of publications that we've linked to on our website for things you can do, just simple steps for soil safety that can help protect yourself, even if you don't know what's in it.
Thanks, Mike. Excellent point. Also, we are approaching the top of the hour. I just want to make sure if anyone else has any questions for Jackie or Mike, please feel free to share. Okay. I actually do want to ask one question of you guys, if that's okay, then we can wrap this up. So what's one of the most common questions that you get from folks who are interested in your soil sampling toolkit?
So one of the most common questions is, what do I test for? And we can help folks with that, figuring that out. Or where do I start? I mean, people just, we've talked to people that are next to a Superfund site and they've had flooding, right? And is it safe to garden? How do I start? How do I, you know, their intuition or the gut is saying, well, geesh, you know, that was a Superfund site, there was flooding, the flooding has receded. Like, I should be concerned, right? I should be concerned about planting a garden now, right? So it's really validating their concerns, and their concerns are valid. And helping guiding them through the steps of what to do.
It sounds like that's like a pretty key resource that you're providing here too, is just that like support with getting started for people who know that there's something to be concerned about, but just what's that like very first step to kind of get that momentum going for figuring
Right,
out.
exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of times people just don't know, you know, they have this, again, this gut instinct saying, I think I should be concerned about this, but I don't know where to start. So that's where we can help too.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Well, we are approaching the top of the hour, and we had this scheduled for 45 minutes, so we know people may have to hop on the call. So I just again want to say a huge thank you to Jackie and Mike from Citizen Science Community Resources for hosting this tool demo with us, and for great questions from folks on the call too. So you can find more about their soil sampling toolkit on their website, which we've been dropping the links, but I'll put it one more time into the chat here for the Citizen Science Community Resources website. And we will post the recording of this video on the Public Lab website as well, and then share all of the links that we've been posting in the chat as well. So, and any other materials that we can share, we'll also put on the Public Lab website. So Thanks to everyone for joining us, and hope you have a great day, and let's continue the conversation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.